Okay guys, we are on a lake today that has a lot of scuds in it. So we're gonna talk how to fish scuds, what types of scud patterns could work, and then most importantly, how to catch fish on these scuds. Stay tuned.
That's a big brown, bro.
Okay, so like I said, we are out on a high elevation lake, and this lake happens to have good population of scuds. First off, I want to dispel some myths about scuds in general. There was a fish right there, just interrupted me as I was trying to speak. But anyway, scuds, they make up a huge portion of fish diets in some lakes, this one especially. The fish grow very large because I think they eat a lot of scuds. Now, you can't just pull up to the lake and just start chucking scuds indiscriminately. There are some strategies, and we're going to get to the strategies, and we're going to also talk about some of the fly patterns that you want to have in your box to be able to fish scuds. So first off, how do you know to fish a scud? So the first thing would be, I'd say maybe check your friends or any fly shops that might have some inside info. But really, all you need to do is come down to the water and maybe take a step or two in the water in between the rocks and the logs, and you should see these scuds go zooming out. One thing, and this is probably the biggest myth, that you need to pay attention to with scuds is they typically don't hang out in the water in kind of the curved hook style format that you see in this little scud here. But rather what they'll do is they swim and they look like little mini leeches or something. So we'll try to get some footage of scud swimming here so you can kind of see what I mean by that. The other thing is that they move. So what that tells us is that we can throw a variety of different fly lines and presentations to get it to be able to imitate the scud's action. So if I'm just rolling up to a lake, I know it has scuds and I may not be super familiar with what's going on. The first thing I'll probably do is I'll try a midge tip or an intermediate line and just a couple of scuds and maybe a chironomid. What I can do with that is I'm pulling those flies, so those flies are going to move mostly horizontally in the water. So obviously, depending on your depth, you kind of lengthen your leader, maybe adjust your weight if you have beads or not beads. A lot of the scud patterns, and I would say this holds true for most of the patterns I fish, I'm going to have a bead version and a non-bead version. With scuds, I think that's very effective. For example, today we're seeing some fish kind of shallower, and what I've seen is that when the fish are maybe in 3 feet of water hanging at 2 feet, you want that scud to be maybe a foot down, which if it's a bead, might be sinking too fast. So we want to sort of work our way top down in terms of the weight of the flies. So you'll want to start off with maybe a weightless version of a scud. The other thing is, and we're going to drop the links down in the description below that will show you the specific patterns that we're using today and some of the other ones that you may want to look at. Because scuds, they come in a variety of sizes, they come in a variety of colors even, and between finding out where they are in the water column and kind of where the fish are, you're going to need to mix and match the color and the bead sort of scenario in order to get these fish right in front of these flies right in front of a fish that's going to eat them. So what I'm starting off with today then is a midge tip line. I've got about a 10-foot leader, and this is just a leader that I built, nothing fancy about it, and I've terminated it with one scud. This does have a fairly large bead, because the fish that I'm targeting are going to be a little further out, probably hanging in 5 or 6 feet of water. So this is going to be a cast out and a retrieve, or I like to give it a jigging and mooching motion because again, those scuds are going to dart and they move. They're typically not just hanging there curved like you see them in the fly bins. However, this is a curved hook, curved scud shape. Nothing wrong with that. But I would say that there are some patterns you could incorporate that are going to be more of the straight orientation. But as long as we're moving them and imitating the naturals, we're going to be okay. So again, this is looking very closely as I cast. And what I'll do is just kind of do a really quick cast here. And I'm going to give that a second or two to sink. And I can either, depending on how far out I am, I can simply slow strip. And then if I know I'm getting into shore and shallower, then I'll raise my rod tip and just let that scud kind of undulate and dip And then I'm watching for either a flash of a fish turning to eat, or I'm going to look to see if I have any of the slack in the leader or my line just do a really flick. Sometimes it's hard to see. Now that's essentially my indicator, so I'm not necessarily using an indicator, although we'll talk about that method in a second. And then in here I've got no back cast, so what we'll do here is just cast the scud out in the bow and arrow method. I can get my act together. You can also roll cast it, and you want to get that slack taken up pretty quick, because again, shallow water, fish sometimes take these aggressively. You need to be able to set. Ooh, had a little fish looking at it. Nicking the bottom. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that and see how that does before we move on to our next strategy with scuds. All right, so first off, we want to talk about techniques on how to deliver your scud to the fish. Now today we are fall fishing, and so we've got some brook trout that are coming in a little bit shallower, and so some are within casting distance. The problem is I've got a lot of trees and bushes behind me, so there's literally no way I could do a full regular normal person cast, so I'm going to have to come up with some alternatives. So the first alternative here, and this is one that I like because the fish are a little skittish because they're moving in close. We've got high sun. We do have a little chop on the water, which is great. But the first alternative that you may think would be a roll cast, which will work great, but that's also going to create more disturbance, and it's going to create more motion as I go to cast, because a roll cast I have to, we'll get to the roll cast in a second, but like my bare minimum, the thing that I want to do to accurately and quietly deliver a fly to a fish in one specific location is going to be the bow and arrow cast. So let me show you how I set that up. All right, so for starters, I do have my fly line that's outside of the rod tip a little bit. So we've got my butt section, and then here's another little pro tip for a bow and arrow cast is that you want to have very minimalistic knots. So if you can do line to leader knot, I would recommend at least a nail knot, preferably a needle nail knot, because that's going to be cleaner transition. Cut those loops off. These are situations where if you need that line to go in and out of the rod tip because we're so close, the loops are just going to create more friction and more stopping point for that delivery. So I've got my homemade leader. This leader happens to be about 10 feet. Normally a stillwater leader, if I'm, let's say, out kicking around doing my normal gig, I'm going to be using a 15 to 18 or 20 foot leader. I don't need that here because we're dealing with tight quarters and I want less mess, but I also want to be able to impart motion to this fly after I deliver it. So what you'll do, and this is important, so number one, I'd start with a barbless fly because you will hook yourself from time to time. So I'm going to hold the fly with the hook point up, and I'm going to hold it so that that tip is right above my fingers. What I don't want is I don't want to release this thing and have it jam into my finger, which I've heard can happen. I don't know that for a fact, but I've heard people have done that. Okay, so once I've got the fly situated like I want it, I'm just going to hold right to the front of the fly, get the hook out of the way, and I tend to want my whole leader out of the last guide because you don't want that first flick to have a loop or a knot to impede the motion. Now what you will see if you do this well is I'm just pulling the rod tip back, kind of loading the rod, and then as I release the fly, I'm also going to simultaneously release the line, and it will actually shoot a little. Okay, now as I've shot it, I've got eyes on the fly a little bit. Now it's kind of sunk out of the way. Now what I'm going to watch for is movement for either the fish, and then sometimes as I start to impart that motion to the fly, as I retrieve it, so to speak, I'm just retrieving it by raising the rod tip and then slowly working the fly back towards me, hopefully in front of a fish or two. And then as I do this, see there was a fish right there that looked at it, kind of leave it in that zone. Oh, come on, buddy, eat it. That fish, I could tell, I could see it in his eyes. He wanted it. Okay, now The key here is do not bring your fly line all the way up to your rod tip. You need to kind of leave that out. And now on my rod tip, I've got about 12 inches. When I cast that, it's going to go about to 2 feet, 24, 20 inches or so. And so that's kind of the ratio. When I say shooting line, it's not shooting a bunch of line. It's literally just with that momentum in the flick, it's getting a little bit more line out for some additional distance. And then you just really need to kind of gauge the amount of line you have out. And so in this case, I want a little bit further cast. So now I put a little bit more line out. Same deal, same motion. Ooh, I see a fish sitting right out there. So I'm just gonna point. Now here's what I'm doing. I'm pointing my cork at the fish, aligning everything horizontally and vertically, and then release. And that thing literally landed right on top of the fish's head. Okay, now we're gonna move on to our next segment here, which is the roll cast. Most everybody knows the roll cast, so I'm not gonna go into super technical detail on a roll cast, but I'm just gonna talk you through why a roll cast will or will not work in this scenario. So number one, in order to do a roll cast, you do need more motion. You're gonna see more motion in your arm, you're gonna see more motion in the line. Your rod is gonna carry and travel a little bit more than your bow and arrow cast. So for this scenario, the bow and arrow cast was good because we had fish pretty close, pretty shallow, and I didn't want to create a huge disturbance on the water, like I'm not going to use a strike indicator, but I can be very accurate with the placement. Roll cast is nice because, again, if I don't have a lot of back casting room, and if I need to get it a little further, the roll cast is certainly going to get it out there a little further. And so what we're going to do is, if I'm in the same position, what I need to do is get a little bit more line out of the rod tip. And in this case where I've got trees behind me, to the side of me, down below me, branches, all that, I'll kind of do a hybrid mode of a roll cast / bow and arrow, where I'm going to bring my rod tip up, and I want the loop, if I am going to go and do my roll cast, I want to envision this motion not catching on anything to that side or to my right. So if I were to do either direction, remember that line is going to carry and follow the path of your rod tip. And what I don't want is I don't want it going off to either side. So in this case, I'm going to bring that line up here, and I need a little bit more out there. So just going to wiggle out. Now, again, here's a case in point of why not to use a roll cast, because that roll cast, if I'm twitching and trying to manage my line right here, then I could have spooked 3 or 4 fish, which I just did. So ideally, I'm not using a roll cast right now, but if I did, then I'm going to get that line as close as I can, and then in one motion, I'm literally just going to bring that rod tip high, let go of the fly, and cast it out. Now I got probably 40–50% additional distance, and now after that point, it's the same gig. I'm going to manage the line, look for that tip of the line to do a dart. I got a little bit of weeds on my system here, which also speaks to another point. You will get caught up on branches, weeds, that sort of thing. So we'll just try to be deliberate about it. We want to make sure we're not ripping the stuff out and creating more commotion. And then again, if I want to, get a little bit more, create more commotion, and I'm going to go off in this other direction. So again, I can't really do anything off to the right because I got a tree right here. I've got a bunch of stuff at my feet, so it's just got to be this hybrid roll, bring the rod tip high, and then roll that out. You kind of give it that motion. I'm sure a legit casting instructor would give you better directions than I am, but that's the goal, is to get that out there. So we're hitting 20 feet out there. I've got probably 10 feet of line, 10 feet of leader, and that's easy. I could do that all day long. And good thing is, because most of the fish are within that 20 to 30 feet range. And then in my case, I'm just mooching this slowly in, looking for that movement. Okay, the next phase of this whole solving the equation thing, I did get one fish on a scud, just stripped normally on a roll cast essentially. And right now I'm noticing the fish have pushed a little bit further out, probably because there's a dude with a fly rod right in front of them here, which is not that uncommon. But I know they're out there, but I also need to keep the fly in the zone a little bit more. What I've noticed is that even with some unweighted stuff, the flies are just getting down beneath them too quickly. So what I want to do is put on a strike indicator. And now the idea of a strike indicator here is just one of these little small Oros indicators. And notice that I've got a tag end that I've been using for some other flies. And this is going to stop this because we got 3X tippet, and these things, even the smallest ones, don't bite into 3X tippet as well. So this gives it a little bobber stop, so to speak. The idea here, we've got about 3 feet between the fly and the indicator, and I'm just going to cast this into a prime location where I see some fish feeding and kind of holding, and then I'm going to let it sit there. So, and that's always a good thing to consider when you're on the water. Is the two scenarios by and large would be, for nymphs at least, are you pulling it or is it going to be sitting under an indicator? And so in this case, pulling it resulted in some stuff, but I think the fish aren't quite that grabby, and we need to have something more stationary placed in exactly the same depth and the same location that the fish are holding, and we'll see if that does the trick for us. And then casting wise here, this actually became a little easier. We have a little bit more mass on our leader, so that roll cast becomes a slight, well, it becomes easier, but also becomes another tangle point if you're not careful. So what I'm going to do, because I need to go diagonally out to my left, I can't back cast, I really can't roll cast that well in that direction, so I'm going to do that sort of hybrid thing where I've got it out there, and then I'm going to bring the line up and then do my roll cast just literally up and to the left, and then I'm just going to let it sit there. If I am catching bottom or I realize it's kind of stuck on something, I'll just watch that, and then I'll also give it a little motion, because once that settles close to the bottom, we should be within a foot at least of the bottom, is just wait. I'm going to impart some motion into it, so because once it's on the bottom, sometimes the fish are going to be nosing it and they need that little movement, and they'll just go boom, grab, like right there. Had some movement. I don't know if it was a fish. I like to think it was a huge fish. And now I'm going to go right back to the roll cast into that same area and let it sit again. Now, indicator fishing is not, for me at least, not as exciting as casting out, working the fly, adjusting the depth and the motion, but this can be, given the situation, an extremely effective technique to catch fish in shallower water like this. Taking it right over the weed bed, and I've got like 2 pounds of weeds. I had the indicator right on the edge of the weed bed. Oh, watch out, he's coming at you.
Did it come off?
Might have. Nope, he's still on. You see him?
Kinda. Invisible.
There he is. Oh, almost. You got him, you got him! Yes! Woohoo! I tied on the Scud. First couple of casts I had more interest, and then this guy, I could see some fish out there, and this is just straight lining, tight lining, just a Scud. It's got a bead in it, and the fish just took it on the drop. I saw him kind of take, and I saw it. So anyway, he's just a little guy. And yeah, so that's a nice male brook trout swimming back to his shady spot, or as I call it, his happy spot. So the Scud's been the best one so far. We're not knocking him out right and left here, but anyway, moral of the story, I'm a big fan of leeches, but it's not getting looked at. I'm losing confidence in it. Switch to something else that I know. There's lots of Scuds in here. Scuds did the trick. Also, all the flies that we're using today, we're going to drop in links in the description, so check them out. Oh, had one swim over.
Right there. Right there.
I mean, they're looking at it. I like to think. Yeah, where'd that net run off to? Oh, nope. Yeah, it's a good female, thank you. Okay, Scud rocket photo in the mouth for sure on this guy. All right, guys. I ended up switching to a Scud rocket. This is a balanced Scud. Again, we'll list the link below where you can get these, as well as a tutorial to tie them. And so the idea here was I cast it up and over a little weed mat. There's a lot of weeds in there. And so what I ended up doing is, because there's so many weeds, I put on this little indicator. It's an Oros. And notice I'm like a foot beneath the indicator. In this case, I knew there were some fish sitting underneath that weed mat, or leaf, weeds, whatever. And so the indicator had kind of pushed back up against the mat. So I knew where this was, and I ended up seeing a fish sort of dart in that direction. So then I just locked onto the indicator. Indicator goes under, popped it, and they took it right in the snout. So the Scud rocket it's more of a, has a hot spot in it. Anyway, we'll list the link so you can get a good photo of it. But anyway, so when it comes to Scuds, very effective in high mountain situations. They're also in a lot of bodies of water out there. So again, you're just kind of minding the technique that you want to fish it, the amount of weight you have on it, whether you're using an indicator or you can pull them. Obviously, in the scenario we're in here right now, we're not doing huge long casts. We're not pulling the flies long distance. I'd call this a lot more technical fishing, as the fish get in shallower and they can see you and you can see them. And then ahead of, eventually you get a spawn that will come in a few weeks, and the fish will kind of be in the same thing, but not as inclined to eat as they are today, which is we're very early October. And anyway, so I hope you liked the Scud video. We've done really well with Scuds. Again, we'll link some of these in the description below. You can also check it out on our website at flyfishfood.com. And then a plethora of videos that we have, how-tos, all free. Go to our school platform, that's SKOOL, search up Fly Fish Food. We'll put a link below. You can sign up, and there's tons of classes and tying tutorials and techniques and that sort of thing that we like to do to help you out. And as a final little note, I would like to comment on, I get a lot of comments for people saying, you've got too much gear. Okay, so I took your advice. I got rid of all my gear. I don't even have a fly box. I've got a GoPro, and to be fair, I didn't even use the GoPro. I just have nippers. So for all those people that have been concerned about the amount of gear that I carry, I'm hoping that you feel better now, because there is no gear. We're just super simple. Anyway, I'm just messing with you. Have fun. We'll see you on the next one. Okay, guys, so we are at the end of this video, and I'm magically transported to our filming studio, but I think it's very important. No, I know it's very important for you to get the skinny on these Scud patterns, because I talked about how to choose them, how to fish them, and what you're going to do to catch fish with them. And that plays directly into the Scud patterns that we're talking about today. Primarily, we're talking about two of the things that I think are of very, very important, and those would be the weight and the color of the Scud. Size, to a lesser extent, but that's also part of it. So let's start with the patterns that we are using. And my personal unbiased opinion is the balanced Scud rocket. In this case, I've got a couple different ones. The one I was using to catch those brook trout was the gray color, kind of rainbow color actually. And the bugs, as you saw in the video, were more of a kind of a grayish hue. They were really light, as most Scuds are, kind of transparent. And but the color scheme was probably a combo of olive and some tannish gray. But so I'll typically have in my Scud arsenal, I'll have something mostly to match the color that I'm going after in the location. Now, if it's a location you've never been, more of a reason for you to get multiple colors. So I'm going olive, tan, and gray. Those are probably the three most common ones that I use, with my preference being kind of the tannish gray because it covers a couple different bases. in addition to the color, and this is going to apply to any of the patterns we're talking about here today, you may also want to have some orange. And I don't think that it's because, like, if you look at scuds when they're live, they're not orange. They will sometimes have an orange egg sac in the middle of them, which is something you can research and look at. But in general, I think the orange is a bit of a strike inducer. So I love to have orange, which is why the Scud Rocket does have an orange tail when scuds don't have tails. They do have hot spots. And the fish can't figure out that the hot spot's at the end versus the middle or the top or whatever. So I think that color scheme is very important. Now, the second thing to pay attention to with, especially on still waters, is weight. If you are fishing in a situation where the fish, like the brook trout we're holding in an area where it wasn't extremely shallow and it wasn't crazy deep either, but in some cases, the weighted version of these flies may have just surpassed where they held and gone straight to the bottom or close to it. So I tend to have both unweighted and weighted versions of the scuds I use. If one of my favorites is this bead body scud, and so it's weighted, but the bead is kind of hidden inside of the body. We'll link these down below so you can get a link to them as well. And this one comes in gray as well as olive. The one I fished for I think it was the first fish I caught, was on the olive color. And then finally, I'll come down to a weightless version. So neither of these two that I've just talked about come weightless. And so this is a flashback shrimp / scud, and it's unweighted. So the nice thing about an unweighted is that if I am in tight quarters fishing to fish that are not very deep and I want to make sure I'm not getting below them, because, side note, fish tend to eat something that's in their face, maybe slightly below, but in front of them or above. If the fish are holding 2 feet beneath the surface and your fly is hanging at 4 feet or 5 feet, like let's say even from an indicator, chances are the fish are not going to eat that. So it is very important to have a weightless version, especially if you're pulling it like on a straight line nymph rig or like with a midge tip and just 2 or 3 flies in a row. Indicators, you can obviously adjust where that hits in the water column, but also you do have the fact that you've got an indicator on there. So if the fish are hanging a foot beneath the surface, an indicator is going to put a little bit of splash on the water, so that may make it tough. Therefore, I think it is important to have weightless scuds wherever you fish scuds, because of that fact that you want to be able to throw in tight quarters, light presentation, not sinking very quickly, and kind of holds it into that water column where you want it. So those are the two things that are most important, I think, aside from, say, presentation and whatever. But color, pay attention to the colors. The naturals have some colors that cover the gamut. And then your weight. So you want weighted and unweighted versions of a scud of some kind in those color combinations where you can. So anyway, that's a wrap up on the scuds. I think scuds are probably one of the more underrated insects to imitate, especially on still waters, because they're everywhere. The fish that eat them gorge and get pretty fat and sassy. So that's even more of a reason to use scuds. Anyway, we'll list these below. Check them out and have a good one out there on the water.